I want to welcome everybody to Claremont McKenna College. My name is Wendy Lauer. I'm the John K. Roth Professor of History and the Director of the McGrublian Center for Human Rights here at CMC. And I'm just so delighted that you're all here, that you made it here to Claremont. We appreciate the journey that you made to come to this reunion, the many paths that you took to get here, traveling long distances, crossing multiple time zones, planes, trains, automobiles, and shuttles. And I'm just talking about getting here from LAX. I'm so sorry about the freeways and the traffic. I know it's horrendous. But we are here and in this intellectual oasis of Claremont known as the City of Trees and PhDs. And we are so fortunate to be celebrating the 14th gathering of Lessons and Legacies. I want to actually give a special welcome to those of you who are participating for the first time. We have many to thank for making this all possible: Wolf and Hillary and Valerie Hebert, the HEF founder, Holocaust Educational founder Zev Weiss, and directors Ben Frommer and the new director Sarah Cushman, Alexandra Israel. And here tonight we have the president of CMC, President Hiram Chodosh, Dean Uven, the assistant director of the McGrublian Center, Kirsty Zitter, Desiree Gibson, the event manager. Is Dot Buchanan here? Exactly. She's not here because she's making sure that all of this looks like it's running smoothly and seamlessly. She is incredible. When she comes into the room, I want to point her out because she's magnificent. And last but not least are the students here at CMC. They have been very eager to meet many of you. They're taking my seminar right now, Researching the Holocaust, and I mobilize them to be kind of on-the-ground support staff for all of you to support what you need when you're in your panel discussions. They're wearing badges that have reverse color. They're burgundy on the outside, and they will be at your panels, discussions, providing you with water, to be on hand to help you with technical support and to give you directions. So please call on them. They're very anxious to interact with you and to learn, as well as celebrate with all of us. I also want to point out on the logistical end that we have a guidebook. It's an app. This is a conference about the digital age, so we thought we should move into the 21st century. And that app is called Guidebook. It has all of the schedule, the program schedule on it. You can talk to one another. There's chitter chat you can do on that and all these kind of nifty digital tools. All meals will be here in the Athenaeum. Lunches and dinners will be in this dining room. The shuttles, for some of you may have had some delays. Hopefully those have been ironed out as of tonight. They're continuously looping. I want to encourage you in the morning tomorrow to get on the shuttle when it starts that process so that we can make sure we can start on time tomorrow at 8:30. There will be coffee stations for you when you arrive here. For those of you who want to walk from the DoubleTree, it's about a 20-minute walk. It's very lovely. Just come south and then east, and you'll hit the campuses. It's hard to miss them. Now I want to turn to my co-convener, Professor Petropoulos, my esteemed colleague, who actually made it possible for me to be here, is a prodigious scholar in his own right, authored 5 monographs. He actually taught me a rule which I haven't lived up to yet because I haven't had a sabbatical yet, and that is 1 book per sabbatical, so I'm going to try to live up to that. He's an expert in art restitution, and his latest book, Artists Under Hitler, is in the, on display in McKenna Auditorium. And his support and participation in Lessons and Legacies predates my tenure here at CMC. And as historians, we could not resist to kind of reflect on the fact that there's a history specific to this conference, this gathering here at CMC. So now I want to turn to you to comment on that.
Thank you. We're kind of the Donnie and Marie show here, right? She's a little bit country, I'm a little rock and roll. She's rock and roll too. As most of you know, Claremont McKenna College hosted Lessons and Legacies once before in November 2006. Think about it. What was then called the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights had been founded in 2003. Within 3 years, it was hosting this, what I believe to be the largest and certainly the most enduring conference on the Holocaust in the world. How was that possible? The answer is here with us this evening, John Roth. John is responsible not only for the center, but for the college's deep and abiding commitment to Holocaust education. He gave a lunchtime talk here last month on Elie Wiesel and his relationship with Wiesel as he marked the Nobel laureate's passing. John described Wiesel visiting CMC on several occasions, and I realized that this room, the Athenaeum, has played host to some pretty remarkable moments in the study of the Holocaust. Our Gray Zones conference back in 2004, which was a kind of unofficial lessons and legacies, I don't know if Zev agrees with that, took place here and had some very memorable exchanges as well. Speaking of venues, the site of the 2018 Lessons and Legacies Conference will be announced on Saturday evening, as is tradition, but I have it on good authority that it will not be held at Trump University. One of the really positive things, we tried the joke, okay? We talked about it. One of the really positive things to come out of this conference are the books. The books, the permanent record of our work done at this meeting, not to mention a useful compendium of cutting-edge scholarship. John Roth, Lynn Rappaport, who is here this evening, and I edited the volume for the 2006 conference. It's good to see so many of you who participated in that conference back here at CMC. And Wendy Lauer, along with Lauren Faulkner, has edited the volume for the 2012 conference held at Northwestern University. They now have the page proofs, so you can examine those proofs, that volume, along with the other new works over at the book display at McKenna Auditorium. Another way of making our work more tangible is by creating and growing institutions. And what John Roth started has been passed along to Wendy Lauer. I'm talking now about the Magrublian Center for Human Rights. Wendy has taken the center to new places, making it a real standout among the 10 research institutes at CMC. She clearly has a talent for this kind of work. As most of you know, she will be taking a leave of absence from CMC in January to serve as full-time as director of the Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the museum in Washington, D.C. But there's a big but for those of us at CMC. But she's not giving up her professorship. She will remain the John Roth Chair, and we look forward to having her return to CMC in the not-too-distant future. Madam Director Squared, I think we could say.
Thanks. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce the president of Claremont McKenna College, Hiram Chodosh. He became president of CMC in 2013, got his BA at Wesleyan University and majored in history, and his JD from Yale Law School, and joined the faculty shortly thereafter of Case Western Reserve University, was there for 13 years, where he also directed the Cox International Law Center and received distinguished teaching awards, and was recognized as an innovator of interdisciplinary education and leadership studies. He moved to the University of Utah in 2006 to take up a position of Dean of the Queeney College of Law, and was named one of the 25 most influential legal educators in the nation. Outside of the classroom, Hiram Chodosh worked in more than 20 countries as a legal reformer and policy advisor, mostly in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, and with funding from the U.S. State Department, directed law and policy think tank advising Iraqi government in 2007 to 2009 on legislative and constitutional priorities. He's authored numerous books and articles, including one recent study of the civil code in India. And in 2011, President Chodosh received the Gandhi Peace Award. On behalf of my colleagues gathered here tonight, we would like to thank you for supporting this conference, sponsoring it, granting me the extra time to organize it, and helping me commandeer the absolutely fabulous staff here to facilitate it. Please join me in welcoming President Chodosh to the podium.
Well, thank you. I noticed that some of you are not eating, and that is a terrible tragedy. So I really would like you to begin your meals. Nothing I can say can possibly nourish you as well as a salad. Wendy was mentioning LA traffic, and I've been here for a little over 3 years, and I tell my friends when they ask me, how's LA? I say, LA is like an archipelago, except we don't have shark-infested waters. We only have this psychological and real barrier we call traffic. And so I do thank you all for coming. I want everyone to join me in thanking Wendy, John, as well as the great exemplar John Roth for bringing all of you here and all of us together again. Let's give them a round of applause. I, both personally and on behalf of the college, I'm just so proud and humbled to have all of you here. This is a profound honor for all of us. We're moved by the work that you do, the humanity you dig out of the ashes and embers of the Holocaust. We're inspired by the opportunity to host you, to nourish you with great food over the next couple days, deep conversation, and I know lasting friendships. Before I introduce Zeb Weiss and invite him to the stage, I'd like to draw an additional connection to the college's history and the Holocaust that you may not all know, and also pose a couple of challenges for us that really do fit in the theme of legacies and lessons. First, a connection. 4 years ago, when I was being recruited to the college, one of my great colleagues, Paul Hurley, in the philosophy department, was trying to describe to me the tremendous ethos of the college for higher learning and for deeper impact. And the way he put it to me was, he said, I'm at a lot of prestigious liberal arts colleges, students want to study poverty, but at CMC they want to end it. And that really stuck with me. And I want to see if I can interpret for you where that dual impulse comes from. You may or may not know that this college was founded out of the vision of the group plan from the 1920s in 1946, and was created on the wave of $80,000 and the GI Bill. 83 of our 86 students that first year were veterans. And they arrived here, lived in barrack-like conditions, and built a great institution from this rocky valley. They had faced down evil, deferred their personal pursuits, and they were eager to get on with the next chapter in their lives. They wanted to grapple with the big questions of our civilization, our liberal arts mission, but they also wanted to get to work, to build the economy, to build the body politic here in the United States, and more globally, our leadership mission. And when you look at our legacy and the commitment to Holocaust studies for many decades here at the college, you might say that our alumni first helped to end the Holocaust and then wanted to study it. But we couldn't do that without the best faculty. And that's where John Roth and Jonathan Petropoulos and Wendy Lauer and so many others have built upon that ethos by connecting thought and action in a virtuous cycle of reflection and impact. The Center for Human Rights carries that work forward. The center is named after the family of David and Margaret Magrublian. David Magrublian, who lost 7 of his 8 grandparents in the Armenian genocide, is currently chair of our board of trustees. So you can see the history and the mission is so intertwined and aligned with the powerful way and the powerful work of all of you for this conference. And as a college, think about it, 1946, we are still young, and we are scrappy, and we are not afraid to take on even greater challenges. We honor but do not rest on our legacy. To honor that legacy, to honor the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust, other genocides, other forms of systematic violence, to honor the commitments of your scholarship, your storytelling, we'd like to challenge ourselves further and ask you to join us in these challenges. In order to pay tribute, to dig out the interred histories, the narratives of each person, each human being, each daughter and father, cousin and grandaunt, to combat the mind-numbing numeric of millions, we must do what we cannot, to understand and explain the pain and devastation to ourselves and others who have increasingly attenuated personal relationships from this history. And at some point, we sadly, very sadly, won't be able to hear in-person testimony of survivors. What then? I know you're all answering that question through the amazing work you're doing to capture, to digitize, to preserve those experiences. But beyond that huge endeavor, if we're really going to reinforce never again, or apply these insights to other disturbing histories or current conditions, however incomparable they may be, we also have to look through the eyes of the perpetrators. Yes, our natural impulses of empathy draw us to tell the stories of victims and survivors, but can we also extend and complement this with a deeper psychological understanding of victimizers and perpetrators? If we don't understand the why, the motivations, the pathologies of the doers of evil, if we don't study and remedy that in our present and our near future, I believe we may fail in our fullest shared commitments to honor and prevent the worst from our past in our present and future. Second, without diluting the intense, focused, dedicated work that each of you are doing, there's another challenge. We have to relate this research, this teaching, to our broader learning objectives. What we want our students to learn, what we want our society and broader civilization to learn. We live in an increasingly fractured society, one in which the centrifugal forces are overcoming the centripetal ones. Look across Europe, the United States, and many other regions. People are attracted right now to extremes. We are suffering a paradox of globalization, integration resulting in disintegration. We are suffering a paradox of technological revolution, more connectivity, generating less personal connection through profound social and economic disruption. How can we, all of us, align our collective educational objectives to address, compete with, and overcome these negative forces? How do we make empathy, courage, and creativity our core learning objectives? The empathy to understand those with whom we are most disillusioned or most angry. The courage to find the truth, enforce a principle when it costs us something important. The courage of the bystander to climb a steep hill to help someone in need. The courage not only to face evil, but to look through its inhuman, albeit sadly human eyes. And the creativity to fix pre-existing conditions of evil human agency, transform bad intentions to good ones, and solve our most complex and disturbing problems. These are major challenges for all of us, and we need to commit to learning and practicing these virtues every moment. So one of the many inspiring leaders here tonight who has dedicated his life to this work is Zev Weiss. I'm honored to introduce him briefly, warmly welcome him back to our campus, and invite him to the podium. As many of you know, Lev was born in Hungary in 1931 and deported with his family to Auschwitz with his parents, a brother and a sister. Upon arrival, he was separated and never saw them again. He was in Birkenau, also worked as a slave laborer before finally being liberated in Austria by the American Army. He came to the United States in 1956 and was a teacher and principal for 35 years. In 76, he co-founded the Holocaust Education Foundation, serving as its president until July 2013, when the foundation was integrated into Northwestern University. Northwestern continues the foundation's efforts to support academic research and educational outreach on the Holocaust. They've been partners for many years in sponsoring and publishing the Lessons and Legacies Conference. In 2000, the Holocaust Educational Foundation funded and Northwestern University established the Theodore Lev Weiss Holocaust Educational Foundation Endowed Professorship in Holocaust Studies. We are inspired, all of us, by this collaboration and by our special guest, Zev Weiss. Please join me in welcoming him here this evening and thank each of you for being here. Thank you very much.
As you all know, I am not Zev Weiss, but Wendy and I are going to assist Zev Weiss, and we're going to help him with an award with recognition for Professor Gerhard Weinberg, who is receiving an award for lifetime contribution to the field from the Holocaust Educational Foundation.
Gerhard Weinberg was born in Hanover in 1928 and fled to England with his two siblings in December 1938. The family moved to the United States in 1941. Eventually, Weinberg earned his master's and doctoral degrees from the University of Chicago. There's little doubt that his intellectual interests were shaped by his experiences as a child. He studied U.S. foreign policy and the Second World War, and this background led to his work microfilming captured German documents in the 1950s. He had heard rumor that Hitler had written a second book and thought it might show up in the cache he was examining. Sure enough, it did. And he took the opportunity to introduce and annotate the volume and publish it in Germany in cooperation with the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich. There was considerable opposition in Germany to the appearance of Hitler's book, and its publication was soon criminalized. Nevertheless, Weinberg continually pushed for publication of critical volumes to counter unmediated access to Hitler's writings. Success came a few years ago, first with the official publication of the second book in 2003 and a new critical volume of Mein Kampf in 2013. And of course, Weinberg has produced a large body of very important scholarship, including The Foreign Policy of Hitler's Germany, A World at Arms, and Visions of Victory, among other numerous books and articles. We asked some of his former students to comment on their Doktorvater, and this is what they said.
Ed Westerman asserted that Gerhard had had a major impact on the U.S. military, a perhaps less well-known achievement. And Westerman added, as a former distinguished visiting professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, Gerhard was famous among the cadets for the breadth and depth of his historical expertise, as well as his high expectations for their performance. It was not only the students who benefited. Many of the faculty, almost all career officers and with master's degrees in history, learned the craft of history and rigor of historical inquiry in their daily interactions with him. Ed Westerman continues, my own development as a historian has been fundamentally shaped by Gerhard's keen eye, thoughtful critiques, vast experience, and willingness to share his talents with a then unknown graduate student. As an academic role model and mentor, there is no one's professional opinion that I value more. Alan Steinweiss recalled Weinberg's reputation and his practices. Quote, before starting grad school in Chapel Hill, I had heard many stories about Gerhard's toughness and high standards. Really? Supposedly, his nickname at Michigan was the Gauleiter of Ann Arbor. That's Alan Steinweiss, folks. I'm still not sure whether this referred to his teaching style or to his activity in the local Democratic Party. Once I arrived at UNC, the man I encountered was nothing like his fearsome reputation. He was the perfect gentleman, considerate, witty, and engaged with the well-being and success of his students at all levels. He held his students to a very high standard, but always in a way that made it clear that it was for our own good. Through his personal example, he taught us to be a scholar, a mentor, and a mensch. When facing difficult questions over the course of my career, I have often asked myself, what would Gerhard do?
These are Doris Bergen's words. Do you mind if I? No, Doris, do you mind do you want to? Oh, okay. This is what Doris submitted. I just was asking her permission and wondered if she wanted to come up. Gerhard Weinberg is my role model. As a scholar, a mentor, and a human being, his insistence on considering the Holocaust and the war together, his rigor in examining archival sources, and his profound awareness that history is about people. These insights and his unforgettable ways of articulating them are central to how I research and teach and to what it means to be an historian. Gerhard has trained an entire cohort of people committed to the Holocaust studies in all its forms in colleges and universities across the U.S., from the Carolinas to Iowa, Vermont, Alabama, Texas, and Florida. He has a cohort of academic grandchildren, PhD students of his PhD students, and a fourth generation, if it does not already exist, is on the way. All of us continue to benefit from his generosity, unparalleled knowledge of history, unerring judgment, commitment to openness and fairness, and absolute integrity.
And so we have a citation for the award, and Zev is going to read that citation and embellish as only Zev can embellish. So.
Thank you. Gerhard, it's been my privilege and my good luck to have you at the Lessons and Legacies as a professor right at the beginning. And in recognition of your nearly 70 years of teaching, mentoring, and scholarship, Professor Weinberg shaped early debates in the field of countering German apologists and unveiling early quasi-deniers. His many notable contributions include his discovery of Hitler's unpublished second book, his consistent advocacy for linking the Holocaust to the war, and his supervision of dozens of doctoral and master's students who valued his cultivation of their humanity and their intellect. I just going to add my own 2 words. It's been a real privilege knowing you for the past I don't know how many years. And it's a privilege to have you at the conference. It's a privilege that I had dinner with you last night and you sounded like a 40-year-old. So it is our joining Wendy and Jonathan to present you with this award.
Thank you very much. The only thing omitted from the nice comments was that among themselves, my PhDs refer to them as survivors. But thank you very much, and it has been both a privilege and honor and supplement to education for me to be associated with the Holocaust Education Foundation, and one can only wish it a successful, hopeful, and productive future. Thank you.
Now it's my turn. Thank you, Mr. President, for the kind words. It's greatly appreciated. Coming to Claremont, it's been my privilege. Been here a number of times. John Roth has become a close friend, a great supporter and developer of the foundation for many, many years. So I'll be always grateful to you, John. My wife has been with me every conference since the beginning. Unfortunately, she couldn't come this time, and she asked me to express her regrets. She had a slight accident. She walks a lot and she fell, but she'll be fine, and she looks forward to the next one. So I'm bringing to you her best regards to all of you and to all of our friends. You know, Lessons and Legacies is not a one-man show. When I established the foundation, I was fortunate enough at Northwestern to have our first Lessons and Legacies conference. I went long distance to make the Lessons and Legacies happen. Peter Hayes was very helpful. Are you here, Peter? He knew I was speaking, so he didn't want to hear it. He's not here? Peter Hayes said to me, let's have a conference. And I said, let's have a conference. There are two problems: where we're going to get the money and how we're going to get the best professors available globally, never mind from the United States. So he said, first of all, you have to get Chris Browning. Chris, would you stand up? Because if not for you, the conference would have never happened. Please, Chris Browning. I flew to London to find him and Maris and some other people, some other Holocaust people. You remember that, Chris? And convinced him, yes, I'll come, and he did. So that's how the first conference was born, and every major scholar in the world at that time came. It was a very memorable conference. Peter Hayes edited the first book, and we won a prize for it for the first conference. So ever since then, we became the traveling conference because I insisted that we do not stay in one place for too long, that the rest of the country deserves the conferences also. So we went to many schools all over the country, and we're here tonight for the second time at Claremont. Lessons and Legacies has been successful only for one reason. And the reason is you, the people who came to Lessons and Legacies, the people who supported Lessons and Legacies, presented, wrote, and supported every other way. So I express my appreciation to all of you, and I ask that you continue to do so. Because my hope is that Lessons and Legacies is going to be the example of conferences that will make the Holocaust Educational Foundation support and develop teaching of the Holocaust. You're one of the main parts of the foundation. You are all over the country, all over the world. And I hope that we can count on you for new students, new schools, and continue the good work, the great work actually, that Lessons and Legacies has been able to do. Now, this has been a sad year. I've been friends with Elie Wiesel for 61 years. We were good friends, and you remember him when I asked him to come to Dartmouth to speak. So he said, I'm in Paris, what do you want from me? I said, I want you to come. He got on a plane, midnight in Paris, and we picked him up in Boston to be at the conference. And many, many of you were there. It was one of the most stirring. Students were hanging literally to come and listen to him. And the president decided to pipe his remarks to the whole school. Unfortunately, he passed away. He's been ill for a while, and he passed away this past summer. We also lost David Cesarani. David Cesarani was a wonderful scholar, a great scholar, a very good friend. He came to me I was in London, said, Zev, can we meet? And we met. And he said, Zev, I need your help to establish an institute in England. And I said, great. And he was the force that made it possible. And we established an institute just like we have here at Northwestern, very successful under his guidance. So we lost two great individuals. And I'm going to ask you to please stand for a moment in memory of Elie Wiesel and David Cesarani. Thank you. Now, I'd like to express my appreciation and thanks to the chairs of the Lessons and Legacies for this particular one. Will you please stand up, the two chairs? Wolf Gruner and Hillary Earl. Thank you. You did a fantastic job. Now, you know, it takes planning, and it takes planning. And the second planning of welcoming us to this wonderful place is Wendy and Jonathan. About 5 or 6 years ago, might have been a little more, they expressed an interest that we come back here. Do you remember, Jonathan? And I said, great, we'll come back. And we're back, and just like the first conference, they're a wonderful, wonderful host. The university and the two of them did everything possible to make you comfortable. And you are. What a great place. Sunshine, too. Guaranteed. So Wendy and Jonathan, we owe you a lot, and on behalf of all those present, I'd like to thank you. Now, I'd like to mention to you a sideshow. When I handed over the foundation to Northwestern, one area that wasn't handed over, and when it happened, I announced it, that we will continue. Many of you who are here went with me. As a matter of fact, that's how the Institute was born, and went with me to East Europe. My family and 50 other professors from all over. And we continue that regularly. And for the past 3 years, Hillary Earl has led a fantastic group to East Europe. We clean cemeteries, physical work. We visit all the sites from Birkenau to Prague, Theresienstadt, and so on. We also went this year for the first time to the Ukraine. So it's going to happen again next year. And I hope after this year, next year, I'll be able to convince Northwestern that they'll do a mitzvah. How many of you know what a mitzvah is? A good deed. Because in Jewish life, we're commanded literally to respect, clean, and take care of the cemeteries. And I don't have to tell you how bad shape they are. So Hillary Earl is here, and if you're interested, please see her. She's the boss. And I'd like to tell you this, that financially it's not cheap, but we provide a substantial fellowship, scholarship, call it what you want, help to make it happen. No one is ever turned away because of funds. And it will take place in June. So you know who Hillary is, and you can, I think I've taken up enough time, but I again want to express my appreciation to the hosts, the president, Wendy, and Jonathan. And you agree with me that I've taken up enough time? That's okay. Again, thank you for being here. And as they say in French, sei gesund. You know, I sort of retired, whatever that means. Some people think I didn't retire at all. Some people think I should have retired more. So anyway, I'd like to introduce to you to the new director at Northwestern. And on your behalf and my behalf, wishing her the best of luck. With me around, that's very difficult, you know, to know that I'm around and I sometimes mix in a little more than I should, but that's my nature, and I will, after all, it's like when you give birth to a child, when they're 20, 30, 40, or 50, you still keep telling them what to do. So, Sarah, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Sarah Cushman, who started her position 2 months ago, and on behalf of everybody, we wish you good luck. And if I mix in, don't worry about it, I'll forget about it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Barry Trachtenberg, and it's my honor to be able to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. I know you're all still eating. Please feel free to continue eating just in the interest of time. We're going to keep moving forward with tonight's program. And also because we're running a little bit behind schedule, after our speaker gives her talk, we won't be having question and answers, but we'll be able to continue the conversation throughout the course of the weekend. It's truly an honor for me to have this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for the 14th Lessons and Legacies Conference. Doris Bergen is Professor of History and holds the Chancellor Rose and Ray Wolfe Chair in Holocaust Studies at the University of Toronto. Prior to that, she held appointments at the University of Notre Dame and University of Vermont, where she was one of the founders of the Holocaust Studies programs in the early 1990s. She's the author and editor of several books, including Twisted Cross, The German Christian Movement in the Third Reich, an edited volume on military chaplains entitled The Sword of the Lord, the editor of Volume 8 of Lessons and Legacies from Generation to Generation, and of course, War and Genocide, A Concise History of the Holocaust, which was just issued in a third and greatly expanded edition by Rowman and Littlefield. She's also the author of more than 40 articles and book chapters on the issues of religion, gender, and ethnicity in the Holocaust and World War II. She teaches regularly in our Summer Institute on the Holocaust and Jewish Civilization at Northwest University. She's led seminars at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial and Museum and in the Genocide and Human Rights University program that's organized by the International Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. She's been a member of the Academic Advisory Committee of the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and is a member of the 5-person design team for the National Holocaust Monument, which is due to open in spring of 17 in Ottawa. I'm hoping it's still on schedule. It was very much my good fortune to have studied with Doris at the University of Vermont in the early 1990s. It was also my very good luck that the first version of War and Genocide appeared in 2003, just when I started teaching my own university courses. Given the arrival of its third edition in the past few months, I'll focus the rest of my introduction on this text. When it appeared, it was really a monumental work. It filled a frustrating gap in Holocaust pedagogy. The field had expanded in so many ways, including new archives, new approaches, new methodologies, new conceptual understandings of how to define the Holocaust itself, but there was no single synthesized volume that served well as an introduction to the Holocaust for students. What the work has done, for example, for women and gender studies of the Holocaust is enormous. As Doris herself writes in the Introductions to the Lessons and Legacies volume that she edited, Nazi destruction was gendered, both in its intent and how its victims experienced it. To destroy someone as a human being requires annihilation of the person as a man or a woman. In the words of one of her former students, Doris may be the person who brought this subject into the mainstream. I've taught her work every year since, in classes as large as 150 and as small as a dozen, in lectures and seminars and online. And as a historian of the Jewish people who resist notions of Jewish exceptionalism, perhaps most helpful for me is that its most basic premise, that the Holocaust cannot be understood separately from the context in which it occurred, invite students naturally to draw upon their larger knowledge of late 19th and early 20th century as a way to comprehend the genocide. It doesn't close off, as so many other works have done, the history of the Holocaust strictly within the subject of anti-Semitism. I'm hardly alone in appreciating this work, of course. In the 13 years since it first appeared, War and Genocide has become the authoritative textbook on the Holocaust. It's simply taught everywhere. It's taught throughout Canada, the United States, England, and South Africa, from high schools in the American Midwest to Harvard University to the University of New South Wales. As Michael Maris recently commented on a symposium in Toronto that was held 2 months ago to celebrate this work, It is the most successful selling book in the publisher's catalog. It's been translated into Polish and is taught widely there, which of course is all the more important given the recent assault on our colleague Jan Gross and others who have shown the courage to force a necessary debate on the complicity of some ethnic Poles in the murder of Polish Jewry. I think we'll hear later this weekend about a letter in support of Professor Gross. And it's no exaggeration, therefore, to say that Doris Bergen is teaching an entire generation of students not only about the Holocaust, but how to contend with it in all of its complexities. This text, like all of her teaching and scholarship, is driven by a deep, unbreakable commitment to respecting the human rights of all beings. Doris asked me to keep this brief, in part because she has a lot to say, so I'll just end with this. She did, and for that reason. I've had the privilege to know Doris for 25 years, from the time when I was a first-year master's student at Vermont. And recently I've moved to a position at a new university, for me, that takes very seriously the ideal of the teacher-scholar and refuses to accept that we as academics must sacrifice one for the other. Doris exemplifies this ideal more than any professor with whom I've ever had the honor to work. She is truly the model of an engaged scholar. It's evident in her research, in her writing, in her leadership in the field, and her activism on behalf of Holocaust pedagogy. Needless to say, she has been for me and for so many others, many of whom she will never even know because of the reach of her book, among the most influential of her generation of Holocaust historians. Professor Bergen is seemingly everywhere at all times, is known and knows everyone, is known by and knows everyone, has read, I think, everything, and yet always seems to have time to talk, to guide, and to mentor, and to teach. And no one is more equipped to speak on tonight's subject of the state of the field of Holocaust studies, so please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Doris Bergen. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, for a really beautiful introduction. And I also want to thank Hillary and Wolf for the invitation to be here. Thanks to Zev, also to Sarah, and everyone else who organized this event. Special thanks to Gerhard, and congratulations for everything. And thanks to all of you for being here and listening. I was very nervous about giving this talk until I heard someone, in fact it was Atina, say, everyone is too busy thinking about the election to really listen or pay attention. So that really helped me, and also now you're all eating. So it's good because I feel a little bit guilty that I may not really be addressing the topic, the state of the field. Another friend, when I told a bit about the content of my talk, said, that's not really the state of the field, that's more like the state of the world. So I have to warn you about that as well. Hillary and Wolf suggested this topic, the state of the field, but as I've been thinking about it over the past, actually quite a few months, I was trying to think of a subtitle, to capture the sort of essence of my talk, and I tried out in my mind quite a few of them. Holocaust studies, the state of the field, too big to fail, that was one. With or without a question mark, I'm not sure. Another one was no slogans. That seemed a little dull. Another, in a moment of despair, was I really don't know. But the subtitle I decided on was It's Booming. It's booming. Look around. Look around this room. Think about the panel that we heard from our emerging scholars earlier this evening. Also about the comments that Wolf made about the hundreds of proposals to participate in this conference. It's astonishing if you think about the quality, the quantity, and the variety of scholarship on the Holocaust that is going on right now in the world. People at all stages of their careers, embedded in a deep institutional framework with all kinds of resources and opportunities to connect, to present. It's an amazing, dynamic field. As Barry mentioned, I taught my first class on the Holocaust at the University of Vermont 25 years ago, this year, 19 1991. At that time, it occurred to me, there was no Lessons and Legacies conference. The first one came the next year. There was no Summer Institute, no United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, no International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, no Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies in Munich, no Jewish museums in Berlin, Moscow, and Warsaw, no centers where you could study or commemorate the Holocaust in Mexico City, in Glasgow, in Vancouver. Even Yad Vashem was much different then, didn't have the kind of international reach that it has now. This is not to say that there was not a field. And in fact, even then, there was incredible documentation, amazing scholarship, and also outstanding literature. Active scholars working in the field whose work I used in those early years included Henry Friedlander, Saul Friedlander, Yafa Eliach, Gita Sereni, Nechama Tek, Leni Yahil. But it was not like now. It was, to use Raoul Hilberg's formulation, a time when the Holocaust maybe was no longer out of the limelight, but was also not yet quite in the limelight, but was pivoting, right, between those two positions. One thing that I had the opportunity to read in thinking about this talk was an unpublished paper, not yet published, by Dan Mickman, talking precisely about 1990, 1991 as a turning point in the field. So the field is booming, but of course the word boom has more than one meaning. A boom is also an explosion. And of course, there's also the expression to lower the boom, right? To put a sudden stop to something. And these other meanings are a reminder that our field, with its growth and its dynamism, also faces some intense challenges, even crises, and some serious changes, all of which, of course, are magnified by the size and the scale of the field. If you think about crises, I want to say right up front, of course, many people have been thinking about and corresponding about developments in Poland. The investigation of Jan Gross, the accusations of him impugning the national honor. And I want to just stop and say, if you get a chance, I know that people have prepared a letter, and really I encourage everyone to sign that letter to support not only Jan Gross, but especially colleagues in Poland, right, where the intimidation factor of these measures must be huge. Our field, of course, also is at a pivotal point generationally. As Gerhard Weinberg has reminded many of us often, a word of wisdom, every 12 months we all get another year older. Have you heard that before from Gerhard? But of course, in our field, looking back on the last year, many people have pointed to the death of Elie Wiesel as in some way symbolizing a change in Holocaust studies. Many survivors, eyewitnesses, founders of the field who fit all of those categories, who have attended so many Lessons and Legacies, are no longer here with us. Some because they're no longer alive, others because they're unable to travel. So this moment of dramatic growth, high profile of our field, also a time of crisis and change. And thinking about all of these issues, I decided I want to talk about three different subjects. First, the Holocaust studies in the digital age. Secondly, Holocaust studies on the international stage. And thirdly, Holocaust studies as a popular sensation. So the digital age. This, of course, is one of the themes of our conference. And I think it's impossible not to be excited about the many, many possibilities that the digital age has opened for our field. Even me, with my terrible record of email responding, I have to probably apologize to every single person in this room. Sorry, I'm getting to your email one of these days. even I see this potential and am astonished by it. The more than 52,000 Shoah Foundation interviews, which we can now access at our library at the University of Toronto, an amazing possibility for students. I will tell you, I had a student this summer who was reading or listening to interviews for some research for me. And she comes from an Armenian family, so I said to her, why don't you go to the Zoryan Institute, which has 600 interviews with Armenian survivors. Listen to some of those and see how they compare with Shoah Foundation. It's an interesting task. She went to that collection, and she found an interview with her own great-grandmother in Armenian, conducted in Montreal in the 1970s, long before she was born. She was able to make a copy for her entire family. Her own grandfather heard his mother's voice after many decades. Can you imagine these possibilities? None of this would have been possible without the digital age. So many other kinds of sources. Think about the collections of Jewish newspapers that you can access online. Think about the ways that the damaged Ringelblum materials can be pieced back together. Even think about the fact that we now have a hologram of a Holocaust survivor. Now I have to pause. Perhaps you've seen this on YouTube. There's a short clip on YouTube, but I know because Holocaust Education Week has already started in Toronto that this project, hologram of Pinka Skuter, a Polish Jewish survivor who lives in Toronto, is being launched at Holocaust Education Week. If you get a chance and you haven't seen it, look at the clip on YouTube. It gives me pause because I think it's both, emblematic of the possibilities of the digital age and perhaps of some potential pitfalls. If you look at the clip that's available on YouTube, what you'll see is the three-dimensional Pinka Skuter seated at a desk, his arms extending sort of out of the computer, right, onto the table, a group of high school students, and they ask him some questions. One student asks, how old were you when the Holocaust happened? And the hologram answers, I was 14 at the end of the war, something. Another student asks, do you remember any songs from that time? And the hologram sort of gives a laugh and says, yes, I remember a lullaby my mother sang, and he sings the song. I become fixated on watching this short clip over and over again, thinking about what does it mean? What does it suggest? And one of the things that occurred to me that seems potentially problematic is it suggests, I think, that there are a finite number of answers to questions that can be anticipated, and that this constitutes knowledge or understanding. But does it? Is it an illusion of authenticity? And might it, maybe if not used carefully, represent a kind of narrowing of the possibilities of research and investigation rather than broadening? When you have a smaller number of celebrity survivors, how many people, after all, can be hologrammed? And when a survivor's voice becomes fixed and frozen, it seems to me that changes the nature of what you're doing when you listen to the voice of experience. The people I know, the survivors I know, are very changeable. I'm just going to give two examples. Sarah Ginaita, whom some of you are familiar with, a partisan fighter during the war from Lithuania, who now lives in Toronto, came to Canada in the 1980s from what was then Soviet Union, Soviet Lithuania, where she was a professor of political economy. She was a staunch Marxist. The first time she spoke to my students, someone asked her a question. She said to them, I'm a Marxist. 10 years later, she would never say that. She talks completely differently about how she understands herself as a Jew, about the state of Israel. She's completely changed her views. Or another example, Livia Prince, I thought of today during our earlier session, a survivor, I know, Hungarian Jewish survivor of Auschwitz. She was asked to testify at the Oscar Gruning trial. Initially, she wanted to do it. She thought very hard about it. But the more she thought and talked and discussed with people, the less she agreed with the whole premise of the trial. In the end, she chose not to go to Germany, and in fact, she became quite critical of many of the other people she knew who did testify. So what would the hologram of Livia Prince say? Which moment in her opinions about Germany, about Oscar Gruning, about the propositions of justice would be taken there? It seems to me, of course, that the digital possibilities can risk feeding a sense that everything has been done, that everything is available and at our fingertips. Raoul Hilberg once said, "All Holocaust research is salvage. It can be no other way." Is salvage possible in pre-curated materials? It's an interesting question. I was also given pause at a recent meeting where, as graduate director at our Center for Jewish Studies, I reported on our graduate program, and I talked with pride about how our funding had allowed so many of our students to travel to Israel, to Ukraine, to Poland, to Belarus, to conduct their research. One of our donors looked at me completely baffled and said, "Why are you sending students to those places?" I said, "Well, they need to do their research." He said, "All the Holocaust documentation is on the web. I've read that many times." To explain to someone the difference between a wealth of material available and the possibilities of things that you don't even know exist, right? Salvage, old sources rediscovered. Things like the clandestine history of the Kovno ghetto police. Some of these very important sources, if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't find them. They have to be stumbled upon. This is not to say the digital age is not incredible, but I think certain kinds of projects are really important. Projects that do return to old and other forms of material. Ever heard of the captured German records on microfilm? Anybody read microfilm anymore, right? But even more obvious things. My colleague, Anna Sternches, has a project that I think is a brilliant example of the possibilities of digital research with many other kinds of material, where she found a trove of Yiddish songs in an archive in Kiev, and has worked together with a group of musicians, ethnomusicologists, and others to reproduce the songs and perform them. This is a project that could never have been done without the possibilities of the digital age, but it required so much more. Another project that many people here are engaged in, Paul Jaskot and Kelly Knowles and others, using the Shoah Foundation materials and issues of space, sort of big data project. Again, there are many possibilities, but I think it requires really careful thinking and not simply a kind of celebration of everything is there at our fingertips. Let me turn to internationalization, harder topic. This, of course, is an incredible, incredible change in our field. How many countries, languages are represented even here in this room? How many topics are possible when the field is conducted on this global scale? If you think about the importance of evacuations to Central Asia, the importance of Morocco or India. We heard earlier, I had an MA student, Pragya Kaul, working on that. I recently heard a talk on the Holocaust in Caribbean literature and art by Sarah Castile. Our field is truly, in a sense that I think Gerhard Weinberg has been encouraging for years, global in nature, and it's enabled us to see the global scope of the Holocaust. One result of this growth, globalization of the field, perhaps unforeseen, but I think important, is that we see sometimes a decentering of the Holocaust in a global context. And that, I think, can be quite significant and interesting. Think about, again, something we know from Marion Kaplan and others, for example, the Dominican Republic, right? The small number of Jewish refugees who made their way there. Of course, in the wake of the massacre of Haitians, that sort of juxtaposition of events. Or in another part of the world, I have a student working on Jewish refugees to Hong Kong. Well, there was a surge of Jewish refugees to Hong Kong from Central Europe in 1938. Their situation there was complicated massively by another much, much larger surge of refugees. From where? Obviously, China, right? After the Japanese invasion of the year before, literally millions of refugees. Suddenly, if you think about this global perspective, a question that has become so almost like unavoidable in many conversations of the Holocaust, why did the world stand by? Looks quite different. There were a lot of things going on in the world, and they don't make the Holocaust less important, but they make it more complex and part of this complicated fabric of world history. Now, another dimension of the Holocaust on the international stage, which I already pointed toward, is, of course, the enormous amount of attention, including political interest, in the Holocaust. The Holocaust has become a kind of, you could say, political capital in a way that maybe was quite unforeseeable some years ago. Of course, the risks of instrumentalizing, distorting, obscuring, obstructing scholarship are very real under these circumstances. I already mentioned the situation of Poland, but there are many other cases too. And often it's the topics of rescue and collaboration that are the flashpoints around which international political interest coalesces. Thinking about this talk, I counted 12 embassies, consulates, or related organizations from 12 different countries that I've had dealings with fairly recently in respect to the Holocaust, many of them through Holocaust Education Week in Toronto. These encounters have ranged from inspiring the German Consul General, Sabine Sparwasser in Toronto, who single-handedly shut down a publicity campaign by a German-Canadian expellee group, claiming that they were the true victims of genocide. It was incredible. To mildly amusing, listening to the many proposals from the consulates in Toronto to host events on rescue during Holocaust Education Week. And by the way, if anyone ever wants me to come and give my talk with so many rescuers, why was there a Holocaust? I have it ready. No one's asked me yet. To the annoying or upsetting encounters, for instance, response to a short paragraph I wrote for a public brochure about Kristallnacht, where I mentioned that Jewish victims in the Sudetenland faced attacks by their ethnic German and Czech neighbors. You can imagine I received a letter from a Czech organization in Canada that suggested that the esteemed Professor Bergen certainly understands nothing of the history of modern Europe. To rather less benign, including one event some of you may be familiar with that was supposed to occur at the University of Toronto involving Ukraine that had to be canceled when one of our speakers, John Paul Himka, in fact, was disinvited by one of the organizers. Thinking about these events in one way, the principle for us as scholars seems quite obvious, right? We have to uphold academic freedom. But it's actually not always clear how to proceed. What does that really mean? When do we engage in the hope that some members of the audience will listen and learn, and perhaps there will be a productive discussion and encounter? When do we refuse, that possibility because there are likely or even certain to be what one might euphemistically call shenanigans. Again, I think about an event that we once held at the University of Toronto that was initiated by Sarah Ganaita and the Lithuanian ambassador to Canada, who happened to know each other from many years ago. We held an event that we received some criticism for providing a platform for an apologist version of the Holocaust in Lithuania. But Jeffrey Kopstein, then our director of Jewish Studies, defended, I think correctly, that event, which also, with the presence of Christoph Diekmann, Sarah Ganaita, provided a forum for an important and I think significant and influential discussion. So several thoughts on the international issue. First, obvious, I think, is the importance of communicating with each other, right? To think about sort of, how do we manage these situations? What do we do? Who can we trust, and so on. Second, I think it's important to keep a perspective and to connect with colleagues in other fields. When I stopped and thought about other historians and colleagues in related fields, I realized that many, many people face these challenges in very intense ways. You have friends who work on Armenian genocide or other aspects of Turkish history. How about scholars working in Rwanda? Quite complicated right now. China, Uganda, Iran, Russia. It occurred to me that actually it's more common to face these kind of challenges, probably, than not. A final thought, I think, perhaps it's good at least sometimes to look up and focus on the long game. It's cold comfort in the initial situation, but I think I'm not the only person to see attempts to control the narrative of the Holocaust as a kind of desperate last gasp. The field is very strong and the scholarship is very compelling. And again, I could tell you an example from Lithuania. Do you remember in 2008 when the state prosecutor opened the investigation around the Koniuszki massacre? One of the people named, Jewish partisans accused of participating in the massacre of villagers there, was the same Sarah Ganaita. Since that time, 2008, those charges were dropped, that case was closed. The ugly discourse of Judeo-Bolshevism certainly persists and continues there, but there are also counter voices. Perhaps they're stronger, I don't know, but a recent bestseller in Lithuania is Ruta Vanagaita's book, Our People, Journey with an Enemy, interviews with Lithuanian eyewitnesses of atrocities against Jews. So things do change. Our field is strong. I was going to say stronger together. Then I realized no slogans, no slogans. But strong enough that I think we should do our work with confidence and with dignity. Let me turn to the last point, popularity. Our field is popular. There's no getting around it. Our classes are full. There are people willing to fund programs in Holocaust studies. There are movies. There are books. I thought about the other day that even Harry Potter, maybe the best-selling book for teens or young adults ever, is replete with Holocaust themes. And, by the way, did you notice in the movie Denial, not only do you get to see our colleague, Deborah Lipstadt, played by Rachel Weisz, who plays David Irving? Timothy Spall. Who is Timothy Spall in the Harry Potter movies? Wormtail. Does that not tell you something about our field? It's not Voldemort, right? So our field has a lot of cultural and social capital. Think about Son of Saul, showered with awards and accolades. Social and cultural capital that expresses itself in maybe some surprising venues. For instance, I went the other day to the dry cleaner. I had to go to a new dry cleaner. My dry cleaner closed down. The dry cleaner began to ask me, what do you do, where do you work, and so on. And eventually, after all the questions, it came out that I was a professor. I teach Holocaust studies. It was so embarrassing. I thought she was going to like fall on the ground like, oh, it's so amazing. It's so, I was like, no, I'm just a professor, you know, doing my work. Michael Maris talks about this. And by the way, Michael Maris sends greetings and regrets that he couldn't be here. This phenomenon, the popularity of our field, in his book about lessons of the Holocaust. And of course, some of the risks are obvious. The popularity, risks, generating responses and work that is superficial, that trivializes. There's also a risk of corruption, if you call it that, of the field. A very experienced university administrator once said, maybe our president should not hear this, once said to me, scholars are very easily won over. All they really want is a nice dinner and to sit next to important people. Ouch, right? Ouch. But these are some of the kinds of risks that come with the popularity of a field. The illusion of knowing, which is the opposite of scholarship, and also the possibility of interference. And again, perhaps I'm telling too many tales out of school, but I can tell you that quite recently, my colleague Anna Sternches and I were teaching a class. A supporter of our program asked to sit in on the class. It was a course on the Holocaust. We were actually teaching about the Sonderkommando photographs. And our guest became quite angry and agitated and actually began yelling at me during the course. How can you pretty up the topic? To me, it was strange that the Sonderkommando photographs could be construed as prettying the topic, but he had his own idea what should be happening in the classroom. All of these kinds of things, they go with a field in the limelight. Perhaps it's tempting to try to separate off scholarship from commemoration, from popular representation. But I think it is important to try to maintain that connection, a connection that is vital on both ends, that energizes both the public commemoration and the scholarship and keeps us honest. And I think, by the way, it's because of this mutual energizing that the news earlier this year about the separation, the physical move of the research function at the Holocaust Museum from the museum proper or commemorative function. It's precisely because of that mutual energizing that scholars and so many people in this room, including Marion Kaplan, who wrote a very eloquent letter, and others, were so concerned and are so concerned. It's the interaction, hard as it is sometimes, between our scholarship and our audience, the world around us, people who care about the field, that energizes both sides of the field. Though I have to add one more thing. Sometimes it does seem more trouble than it's worth. Barry mentioned our National Holocaust Monument in Canada. One of my PhD students, Ryan Masters, has the unenviable job of drafting the text for the interpretive center, 10 panels, 50 words each, everything anyone needs to know about the Holocaust, and expressing Canadian values. You try that. But many more people will read that than his dissertation. You could be quite certain. Another byproduct, I think, problematic one, of the popularity of our field is the tendency to use the Holocaust as a shield, right? Or as a kind of, maybe fig leaf. I thought about this point when I read the op-ed by Jared Kushner. Perhaps you read this as well, who wrote, "My father-in-law cannot be a racist. I know because I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors." Are those things connected? Can you make that claim? We had another event recently at the University of Toronto, Ukrainians and Jews, a Millennium of Coexistence. And I had a meeting with my colleague, Ori Yehudai, before the meeting, or before the event, to talk about what we were going to say. And he made the point, it was based on a book by my colleague Bob Magochi and Yohanan Petrovsky Stern. Ori made the point that the coexistence presented in the book was based upon an idea of Ukrainians and Jews as victims, the victims of the 20th century. And I asked him almost rhetorically, why does everyone want to be a victim? I didn't expect him to answer, but he did. He said, that's obvious, because victims can do anything. They can't be held accountable. It was a chilling thought. It seems to me these are the kinds of issues that we have to think about seriously with our field in the public eye the way it is. Now, one more twist. These are serious and vexing problems, but in some ways, they're problems of abundance, right? What some people might call first world problems. Too much attention, too much visibility, too much funding. Imagine colleagues in other fields. They would be quite happy to have these problems, right? Quite happy. Think about colleagues who maybe are eking out a living, teaching a few courses here and there. They might say, give me those fancy dinners. I think I will be able to use those resources responsibly and well. So thinking about this issue, the way that popularity represents opportunities as well as pitfalls, I think also reminds us that it's a responsibility. I think it's no longer possible to study or represent genocide, maybe extreme violence in any context, without invoking the Holocaust. This is the stature that our field has assumed. That's the reality. I think we in the field need to engage this reality, and many people here are. Shoah Foundation with its collections of interviews, also from other genocides. I think about Roger Brooks and his work with Facing History. My colleague Dorota Glowaska, her project Decolonizing the Field. I don't mean we all need to become comparativists. We do what we specialize in, but I think it is important to be open, to let our field be open, not defensive, interested, and engaged. The state of the field is exciting, it's distressing. We're looking at the fourth generation, as we heard. My friend Sarah Ganaita told me, in her view, the fourth generation, she was talking about Lithuanians, is the generation that is ready to face the truth, even when it's not comfortable. I don't know if that's true, but it's an encouraging thought. What will the fourth generation of scholars do? Certainly they'll bring new questions and revisit familiar topics in new ways. A great example, by the way, of a successful revisiting of a familiar topic is Kim Wunschmann's book, Before Auschwitz, Jewish Prisoners in Pre-War Concentration Camps, which I have permission to say received the Yad Vashem Prize in Holocaust Studies. And there's so much else going on in our field right now that's incredibly exciting. Work on sexuality, on visual culture, on space. I always complain that there's not enough work on people with disabilities as victims, but of course, the last winner of the Sybil Milton Prize, Sarah Bender, for her book on the T4, certainly made a step in that direction. And in a field where sometimes the most exciting new work is actually revisiting forgotten old work, right? Think about Boaz Coed, Laura Yokush, Sam Kasov's earlier book on Ringelblum. Anything is possible. So in this pivotal moment, pivotal also here in this country, now you can think about the election again, no matter what happens, I hope that we can do our best to keep our field open to new questions and open to the world. Thanks.